starring Janelle Monáe. Visit redbox.com for all the ways to watch. If you're just waking up this morning, you might have missed this story. James Harden turning down an opportunity to be the NBA's first $50 million a year player. The Rockets wanted to offer an extension that would have put his salary right at $500 million. But Woj last night on SportsCenter with Scott Van Pelt says right now, the operative letter is B. He'd rather go to Brooklyn than the bank.
James Harden has made it clear to Houston he turned down a $50 million a year extension. That was the max extension off of his current salary. 2 years, $103 million. Turned that down recently, I'm told, and made it clear, I want to go play with Kevin Durant. I want to go play with Kyrie. I want to play in Brooklyn. But right now, that is just a wish.
He's going to force his way there, Key.
Why not? I mean, yeah, that just that tells you something. I don't want to be here, man. I don't care how much money you give me. It's not what I want to do. It's not for me. I want to go to Brooklyn. End of the day, I'll worry about my money later on.
Indeed. And the Suns have a guy on the move as well. They pick up Chris Paul from the Thunder. So James Harden might be heading to Brooklyn. Chris Paul is definitely heading to the desert. Pair him with Devin Booker. You got a nice little 1-2. The Thunder in full rebuild mode. Hired a new head coach last week. They pick up Oubre, Ricky Rubio, Ty Jerome. First-round pick. Sam Presti's been known to come up big with those first-round picks. Just look at what he did with some of the guys in OKC that have flourished elsewhere. Oh, like James Harden. Here's Ramona Shelburne essentially saying the combination of factors made this just too good for CP3.
They're a team on the rise, close to home. He sees kids all the time. His family can come see him. It'd be too high. I thought Philadelphia was in the mix for Chris Paul, not just because Daryl Morey knows him from their time in Houston together, but he would just be a great fit for them in Philly. They need a point guard, obviously, with that team. But it's just harder to get that done with what Philly has to offer.
And they do have a second-year head coach in Monty Williams. Draft tomorrow, free agency 2 days after that. Regular season begins December 22nd. And Key, you said this is great for CP3.
It is a great move for CP3, although I don't like it. I would have rather see him go to like a Milwaukee out of the East. Easier opportunity for a great guy like this, a Hall of Fame guy, to get an opportunity to get into a championship situation. They're not in a championship situation in Phoenix. Let's be real. There's Golden State coming back. You still got Denver. You got Utah. There's Portland. There's the Clippers. There's the Lakers. I mean, it seems like to me it would have been easier. I know that Drew Holiday is being acquired by the Milwaukee Bucks, but I wonder if Milwaukee kicked the tires at all with OKC about acquiring Chris Paul to put him with Giannis.
Well, that's definitely a conversation they should have. And ultimately for Chris Paul, if you can't get it with a championship contender, you want to get yourself in a comfortable situation. And going out there with Monty Williams, a coach he's got familiarity with because they were down in New Orleans together, and then being that guy that can unlock the potential of DeAndre Ayton because he's the guy that the Suns took ahead of Luka Doncic. So you need to have somebody that can be a playmaker for him and also somebody that can make Devin Booker's job a little bit easier. So I think that Chris Paul is a good fit. Clearly, the Suns aren't a championship contender, but they were one of the biggest surprises that we saw down in the bubble with their performance. So adding a Chris Paul to that equation, I think that has this Suns team pointed in the right direction.
No, it does. It gives them another 7 or 8 wins, right? Chris Paul's good for that. And so I just, for me personally, because I like Chris, I wanted to see him. I would have rather seen him with the Clippers. Just give him an opportunity. Instead, the Clippers have made poach our guy, Rondo. So it just depends. Our guy, meaning the Lakers, just in case you're wondering, Chris.
Well, I'm a Lakers fan too, Keith.
Okay,
I'm
so
right there
he's
with
with
you.
us.
Yeah.
Thank you. I
There's a lot of
appreciate
our,
that.
us, and we on this show, and we're talking about the Lakers, that's for sure. One other thing to mention, Chris Paul, obviously an elder statesman in the NBA, but last year certainly turned back the clock. The Thunder were much better than anybody could have reasonably expected, and that's because of the play of Chris Paul. Now you serve as a mentorship role in Oklahoma City. You go to Phoenix, which is one of the youngest teams in the NBA, so he can have that sort of role off the court as well. You mentioned DeAndre Ayton. Look, Luka Doncic was the runaway best player in this draft to that particular point. But if you look at Ayton's numbers, he had a little bit of a slip-off, a little bit of a suspension, but his numbers have actually been really good. He's been totally overshadowed by Doncic, but Ayton's done a really, really great job. One other thing I wanted to mention, trades were on a freeze since the deadline had passed, and obviously then we went to the bubble where Chris mentioned the Suns actually went undefeated. But a couple of days ago, the NBA lifted the restrictions on what they call trade concepts, right? Because the offseason is so truncated. You got the draft, and you got free agency 2 days later, and then you got 71 days of an offseason. So the NBA essentially said, listen, you can't tamper, you can't talk, and all that sort of stuff. This time we're going to raise that a little bit. We're going to make sure that gets lifted so teams can talk about concepts of trade. So when they said, look, it's time to do it, you can go for Chris Paul because you've already had the background chatter. It's an important distinction to make because the NBA obviously is dealing with an offseason like they've never had before.
Well, it's just like when free agency starts, right? It's like they don't sign until a certain date, but they have a week of conversations.
Right, the tampering period.
The tampering period. They can put in play and have their conversation about what the deals could potentially look like. And so, yeah, it's fine. I think it's a good idea.
20 seconds away from talking about the more juicy story, which is Harden. But first, Keyshawn J. Will Zubin brought to you by Straight Talk. Look, we all accidentally damage our phones. It happens. Now, Straight Talk Wireless's new Platinum Unlimited plan includes phone protection, just $65 a month for unlimited talk, text, data, and more. See Mobile Protect terms and conditions at Asurion.com/Straight Talk. Limitations and exclusions apply. Is James Harden about to be your neighbor? Is this really going to happen? I mean, this is incredible. Harden's got leverage like he's never had before. The Rockets have a brand new GM and a head coach. If they don't think that he wants to be there, they can rebuild on their own merits, go in a completely different direction, unlike Daryl Morey, and then send Harden to a place he wants to go. Obviously, he is in search of that elusive first championship.
Yeah, and he should be. Here's another guy, much like a CP3. You want to see him go to a place that they have a real opportunity to win a championship or at least play in a championship again. And so it makes all the sense in the world. You know, it's weird on the surface of things, especially as athletes or people look at athletes and say, wow, he turned down 2 years, $103 million. That's
hard to compute.
It is. It's just like, how could you wrap your mind around it? But what's the most important thing? The most important thing is trying to get to a championship. I got all the money in the bank. I can't spend it all. Right? I mean, that's the way he looks at it. And he's young enough to get back to a third or even I don't know if this is a third or a fourth contract extension at some point in time.
It's the only thing missing because he's one of the greatest scorers of his generation. He has shown he could fill it up. He can score in any which way, but that chip's the only thing
if I made $350 million or whatever the numbers are, I'm just, on and off the court if I'm James Harden. What's another $100 million? I'd pay $100 million to get to my championship ring. That's why these owners out here in professional sports spend so much money trying to have that conversation in the room when they go to West Palm Beach to their little meetings and boardrooms, and they want to be able to talk about, I got a ring. That's the thing that hurt a lot of owners when they're in these meetings. All their little buddies walking around, Chris, and they could, hey, how you doing, so-and-so, and how you doing? Yeah, it was great to have that party the other night, and I can't have that conversation. That conversation is real. James Harden wants to have that conversation. He can't, when he's on those trips with his friends that have won championships, he got to sit quiet in the corner.
He can't be in that conversation.
Can't be in that conversation.
It's a whole different ball game. But when it comes to James Harden, I'm not necessarily sure that he's a fit in a lot of other places. So I wonder about the leverage that the Rockets would have when they try to move him if they do decide to go in that direction. If you're Houston, I mean, you've already started to kind of tear it down. I mean, you moved on from Mike D'Antoni. You parted ways with Daryl Morey, so it almost feels like you've started the process. Now it's just a matter of, okay, can we offload Russell Westbrook, PJ Tucker, and then what can we bring back in return from James Harden in order to jumpstart this rebuild? Because if James Harden lets it be known that he doesn't want to be in Houston anymore, you have no choice as an organization.
What did I say yesterday? With professional athletes tell an organization, I don't want to deal with you, those organizations will find a way to move you because they can't have that in the locker room. They can't have it. And it's not that James Harden's a bad guy.
Especially with a new coach.
It's not that he's a bad guy. It's just that I can't have a guy that doesn't want to be here not buying in 100% to what I'm trying to do. And it would be unfair to Silas to do that to him. So, yeah, you go ahead and you move him. You saw what happened in San Antonio on Kawhi. Kawhi didn't want to be in San Antonio. So they said, okay, we're going to ship you off to Toronto. And how did that work out, right?
Yeah,
that's what happens.
Think about this. Silas, for those that aren't aware, Stephen Silas, 19-year NBA assistant, finally getting his first crack as an NBA head coach, the son of Paul Silas. You get that crack. You think you're going to have these two big superstars. You might not have either of them when the season starts December 22nd. So it's an interesting dichotomy from what he thought he was walking into to what he might have now.
But did he really think that, though? You know what I'm saying? Like, did he really think when they sat down and they hired him that he was going to have Westbrook and Harden. And I could ask Woj that when we get Woj on, but think about it. If I'm a coach that's taking over a job and I know that they failed at the system that was in place before, I'm going to run something close but not quite the same. Chances are these two dudes aren't going to deal with me. You know that. Like, you honestly know that. He's not oblivious to the situation when he took the job.
No doubt, but according to Jay Will, when he was talking about this, and Jay's going to join us a little bit later this morning, Silas, yes, indeed. Jay was saying that Silas is really known for his communication and his rapport with big superstar players. He had been in Dallas. He had been in a lot of places that had star players, and even though he wasn't the head guy, now he's moved the 18 inches over to be the head guy.
Different.
He's had the relationships. You're right, it's 18 inches, but it's a world of difference. Let me ask you this. Rarely does anybody go to a team, Chris, for an assistant coach, but it is notable because you mentioned Mike D'Antoni is out of Houston, but guess what? Mike D'Antoni's an assistant coach with the Brooklyn Nets. Obviously, he and Harden did have a very good relationship. So take me inside that. I mean, if you're a player that likes to fill it up and has the usage rate of Harden, you'd love to play for a guy like D'Antoni, who's an offensive specialist. Is there any way you think maybe that could be leaning him and saying, you know what, I'd love to play with Kevin Durant, be reunited with him, play with Kyrie, play with Steve Nash or for Steve Nash. But Mike D'Antoni, the guy that may have taken my career to the next level, is right there in Brooklyn.
See, I think it's less about James Harden's relationship with Mike D'Antoni and more about Harden's relationship with Kevin Durant and probably more importantly, Kyrie Irving. Because if James Harden comes to Brooklyn, James Harden is going to be the primary ball handler for the Brooklyn Nets, and Kyrie's going to have to be off the ball. Is Kyrie going to be willing to resign himself to that kind of role? I mean, is he going to be willing to do that similar to what he had to do in Cleveland when LeBron came back? That's the question I don't know. Is that personal relationship strong enough to make that dynamic work? I think that's the biggest question when it comes to whether or not the deal makes sense for the Brooklyn Nets.
I think the relationship is strong enough. I think because you have Kevin Durant, you have Mike D'Antoni there, you have a veteran in Steve Nash, Jacques Vaughn is there as an assistant, and Kyrie can play off the ball, can play on the ball. It gives them options. Now, clearly, you got basically three dominant players in terms of offensive performance, all different in their own way, right? But that's lethal. I think that's lethal for the East. And if they grab James Harden, nothing less. I know prior to this I said that they, showing up in the Eastern Conference Final would be good, but nothing less than getting to the championship? Like, nothing less.
Oh, yeah. If they get James,
bust.
Yeah, Key, if they get James Harden, the only team in the East that's going to stop the Nets from getting to the NBA Finals is the Nets.
Yeah, it's the Nets.
There's nobody else.
Well said, because then think about it. Just on the surface, James Harden, Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving.
And whatever else.
And anything else they can put together. And Key, well, you're going to be at a lot of the games. I know you live not too far from the Barclays Center. We should mention James Harden is an 8-time All-Star and the 2018 NBA MVP. Listen, he's got everything except that chip. His player resume is brought to you by Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Learn more at Indeed.com/credit. So once again, let's just go through what's going on in the NBA over the next couple days. The draft is tomorrow night on ESPN. Jay Will be there. He'll be with us this morning to break it down. We'll see where the latest Ball brother ends up. LaMelo is in the mix there. 2 days later, free agency. The season on December 22nd. Trade season, as you can already see, is open, and we'll see if the Nets and the Rockets swing a huge one. We'll keep you up to date. Still to come, Philly media and Philly coach